Check, check, mic check. Check, check, mic check. Welcome to Podcast Envy, episode 78. I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder, and this is an office hours episode. Office hours episodes are those opportunities for you to get a sneak peek into what working with your podcast boss can be like for a coaching and strategy session. Today, we are talking marketing and podcast growth strategy with Lisa Lackey from Insideout Conversations. Lisa is one of my favorite clients. Well, they're all my favorites, really, for different reasons. Really and truly, I do love my clients. But Lisa, I've been working with for a couple of years now. She launched Insideout Conversations in 2018 amongst trepidation and questions about whether podcasting was really something that she could do. And I'm so glad she took the leap, took a risk, and created this show because it has been a pure joy watching her grow in terms of her content, in terms of her approach. I love hearing Lisa's voice in my ears month after month, especially recently with everything that's been going on in this year, and especially with her unique point of view as a Black female clinician who has been in practice for a very long time, of which there are not nearly enough in this world. She has a lot of very insightful, relevant things to say about racism and trauma and recovery in her show that has really been educating me and providing me a lot of insight that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So in this conversation, we're going to be talking a little bit about the why behind Lisa's show, ideas for growth, and how to think about positioning the show in the new year. And if you feel like you have some of these same questions, I'm going to encourage you to really listen in. About midway through the episode, you're going to hear a Podcast Angel segment in which I'm going to share with you an opportunity for you to get the kind of support you need to have these kinds of questions answered for you in a very affordable, very fun way. Okay, I could go on and on about how much I love Insideout Conversations and Lisa Lackey, but you know what? I'm going to save it. I'm going to let you listen to this episode. And if you love it, I would love to hear from you. You can leave a review for Podcast Envy very easily by going to ratethispodcast.com/envy. Choose the platform that works best for you, and then take a screenshot and send it to me so I don't miss it. And then I will read your kind, insightful, inspiring words on a future episode of Podcast Envy. Oh, and if you think a session like this would be ideal for you, and you want to get this session for free, that's exactly what office hours is. You can book your very own office hours session with me, which is a 1-hour one-on-one conversation about a specific aspect of your show. There is absolutely no monetary cost to you. You simply agree to share our session with our Podcast Envy community right here on the show. I am taking applications for future Podcast Envy episodes for 2021. There are exactly 6 spots available throughout the year. So if you want one, do not delay. Go to thecreativeimposter.com/office hours, linked, of course, in the show notes for this episode, along with links to find Insideout Conversations and all of the other things that we will mention here in this lovely episode at thecreativeimposter.com/podenvy078. It's a lot of URLs. Anyways, please apply to be featured on an episode of Podcast Envy Office Hours with your podcast boss. That's me, Andrea Klunder. And I would love to learn more about your show and how I might be able to support you in making the whole experience for you, your listeners, and your guests that much more amazing. Okay, here we are. Let's get into Office Hours with Lisa Lackey. Lisa Lackey from Insideout Conversations and Insideout Living and Lovely Space. And how many other projects do you have going on over there that have cool names?
Let's just call that it. That's enough.
Thank you so much for joining me for Podcast Envy Office Hours. Tell us, Lisa, a little bit about what is Insideout Conversations and why on earth do you podcast?
I podcast because it started off with me facing a fear, because I always wanted to podcast, but I always wondered what the content would be, if people would like the content or not like the content, all those things that you think about. And then I also was overwhelmed because I thought that I had to do it all on my own. And then I met with one of your other clients, Sarah Bueno, and we started talking about podcasting. And I told her what been wanting to do for a while. She said, call Andrea. And I was like, there's such a thing as a podcast coach, editor, all this stuff. She says, yes. And when I called you, you just made it easy for me. And it's been, not always a consistent path for me because things would get in the way. But I always felt like I could come back on the path. And I found that I really, really love doing podcasts. And so, with Inside Out Conversations, as a clinician, that's really what I'm doing most days is having conversations. And from those conversations, there are so many insights that the client doesn't necessarily realize that they have. But through conversation, all of this insight and healing and acknowledgement and validation starts to happen. And it's mutual because as I'm with them in their healing process, things also come up for me as insights for my personal life or reminders of healing that I have that I'd forgotten that it wasn't always there. And so I wanted to bring conversations to a larger audience and people that may never even reach a therapist's office. And I wanted to have a platform where there could be messy conversations. They could be the conversations that we have in our heads, but we don't normally talk about them out loud. There could be conversations about questions that we're looking for answers. It could be conversations about things that make us cry, that make us laugh, that actually make us human. And the conversations always involve stories. And so there's a connection that happens. And there are resources that I can give to a larger audience without using clinical terms that they can use on their path and hopefully share with others.
Well, first of all, I think you just rewrote the description for your show just now.
Oh, thank you.
We'll have to play that back or transcribe what you just said because, the description for your show that shows up in the podcast app in Apple Podcasts and on the website and everything is something that we create in the beginning of the show when we have an idea of what we think the show is going to be about. And a lot of times, and I'm going to say even for myself, I think maybe I've changed my show description one time since I started 5 years ago. I think your show description has been the same since you started. And I think that your show has evolved and the why behind your show has evolved and become clearer. And what you just said, some things that I jotted down as you were saying that you want to have the messy conversations that we have in our heads that we don't normally talk about out loud. That is a great description for a podcast that we should have in in your show description. So this brings up a couple of points to consider. Another thing that I love about podcasting is you aren't married to anything except maybe your RSS feed, which nobody actually really sees except the bots anyway. You can change your cover art, your description, your focus, your music, even your title at any time. This takes the pressure off when you are freshly launching your show because though I know you want to get everything exactly right the first time, you don't have to. Not only that, your show can and will and should grow and change along with you if you stick with it long enough. I know that in the beginning, you were just doing solo episodes. So it was just you talking about something that you wanted your listeners to relate to. Stories from your personal life, things that you've learned, those things that you were talking about, reminders and insights that you've had in your life that maybe you've forgotten that were brought to light for some reason. And recently you started having guests on your show. How are you feeling about bringing in more people to the show and having more voices?
I love it. I love it
You were originally solo because,
because I wasn't sure if I was going to like podcasting.
yeah.
And so I didn't want to start inviting people and then say, oops, no, we're not doing it anymore. And I think I am enjoying it more than I thought that I would.
Hmm. What has been the best part about it? What specifically are you enjoying?
Oh my goodness, so many things. So, one is reconnecting with people
Mm.
and learning more about their expertise, their thoughts on issues that are just human issues. It also opens up my thinking because there's a different perspective. I like the energy that is shared when there's someone else there. And oftentimes from those podcasts, I get other ideas for future podcasts.
And what is the goal of the podcast for you from in terms of being a clinician, in terms of being in private practice? Does it have a business related or professional related goal for you right now? Or is it primarily just a passion project? Which I don't mean to say just a passion project because these are also important, but what would be a successful show for you right now?
So, in the beginning, I think it was a passion project.
Mhm.
What it is becoming and has become probably over a year now is believing that it can open up doors for me to speak, can open up doors for me to facilitate conversations in different venues. Like, for example, in the last week, I was invited to do two webinars. And basically, it was someone had heard from someone else about the podcast that I had done with my conversations with my white friends. And they asked me to do a webinar for their international organization to talk about empathy and racism.
So this was a referral from someone that you don't know?
It was a friend of mine said, you got to listen to this podcast. And then this
Okay.
person said, does she facilitate workshops? Would she be willing to come and do a seminar? And that was really cool. And in speaking engagements that I've been having, I've been able to refer people to listen to the
Mhm.
podcast. And I don't do that as often and as efficiently as I think that I could to get a wider listener group.
And with that question in mind, it brings us to Podcast Angel Time. Podcast Angel Time is that time in the episode of Podcast Envy where I share with you a product, service, opportunity, or offering that is going to make your podcasting experience oh so much better on every level. And right now, that angel is me. Well, actually, not me. That angel is us. Who is us? Hopefully you and some other fantastic, creative, driven, imaginative, supportive professionals who podcast. And those professionals who podcast make up the first ever cohort of the Podcast Envy Pro Pod. That is a lot of plosive P's to say in one Podcast Angel segment. The Podcast Envy Pro Pod is for you if you are someone who has been podcasting along, businessing along, entrepreneuring along, and would like to have an opportunity to connect with others who are up to the same thing in different niches and fields with different areas of expertise. So that when you have a question like Lisa has here about marketing her show and growing her show, when you have a challenge come up, when you have an opportunity for your show that you're not quite sure how to take advantage of, like, hey, someone reached out and wants to sponsor my show, but I've never had a sponsor. What do I do about that? You have a trusted network of people who maybe have been there, done that, and can provide some insight, some ideas, some fresh perspective, some support, some cheerleading, whatever it is that you need in that moment. When you join the ProPod, you'll be able to meet with this cohort once a month, and each month we will focus on problem solving for one show show to find the next growth spurt or opportunity for that podcaster. And probably we will all learn something at the same time as well. Every 6 months, you will also get a one-on-one strategy session like you're hearing right now with Lisa, with me, your podcast boss. And in the in-between times, you will be able to use the fantastic platform of Mighty Networks to post quick questions, thoughts, wins, challenges, frustrations, tears, laughter, whatever your podcasting journey brings about in 2021, you'll be able to share and communicate it all in our private Mighty Network group. ProPod membership is $99 per month, or if you want to make the commitment for the full year and really get the most out of it, that's only $79 per month when you pay upfront, which is about 2 months totally free. Now, this is a highly curated group, so there is an application process. You can find the application and more information at thecreativeimposter.com/podcast envy Pro, linked in the show notes, of course, for this episode. And if it sounds cool, but you have a few questions or you want to find out if it's going to be right for you before you ever even fill out the application, you can schedule a complimentary call with me for 20 minutes, the perfect length for a delicious cup of tea. That is at thecreativeimposter.com/T420. That's TEAFOR20. I only have a few more tea dates left before I go on holiday break with my production team. So if this sounds like something you want to get a jump on in January, and I know you do, grab one of those spots with me ASAP. We've talked a little bit about the consistency. When you are consistently putting out episodes, it looks to me like the numbers have grown a little bit and it's very slow. There is definite growth the more consistently episodes come out. And then, of course, it stagnates a little bit when there's no new content coming. Also, you've clarified your focus for right now around that particular topic that you just mentioned that you were asked to come facilitate around healing racism, empathy, anti-racism movements. And that has become a focus for you and your husband, Steve, in your work. And it's obviously very timely and something that people are seeking out, resources, trainers, facilitators on that topic in a way that maybe they hadn't urgently been before.
And I think the centerpiece of all of that is there are other people that have a lot more time and focus on studying and researching and being on the front lines of really combating racism and have been for years. And so our tiny little lane is looking at it from a different perspective. One is that you got to understand the traumatic impact of racism and whether the person who is Black or brown understands that or not, it's living in our bodies. And it is not metabolizing well because we never get a chance to process. So that's one piece that we bring. And the other part is this strong belief that transforming racism requires us to enter into a place of empathy and compassion. And the wonderful thing about that is that empathy can be taught. You don't have to be born empathetic. And I believe that will create long-lasting change because it's not just doing, it's requiring people to be and become.
So it feels like from a marketing perspective, what needs to happen, I'm drawing a little diagram that you can't see, but I'll show it to you in a second. The podcast feeds the speaking engagements and the speaking engagements feed the podcast.
Okay.
So it's really two goals that you have. And this makes sense. Whenever I'm looking at podcast marketing and thinking about how it should work, it should always be not that you're just trying to market the podcast and not just that the podcast is trying to market your business. It should be both. It should be a cycle, like a circular thing that one feeds the other and feeds the other. And so your efforts to grow the podcast should also grow the opportunities for speaking and facilitating. And then the facilitating and speaking should also feed the podcast. And so it's really two ends of that strategy that create that circle. This is what I love about podcast marketing is that when done well and with clear intention, your podcast can be the marketing for an aspect of your business. In this case, speaking, facilitating workshops, and the speaking gigs can be marketing for the podcast. Check your cycle right now. Does your podcast feed an aspect of your business explicitly? And do you feed your podcast back from that business activity? So right now on your website, do you have a dedicated speaking page or a facilitating page?
No, right now, the Insideout Conversations
Mhm.
website is not up and running.
Mhm.
It will be up and running, and when it is, it will have a speaking page on it.
Okay. So in the interim, one thing that we could easily do, the current insideoutconversations.com page that we're using is the template that Libsyn provides because Libsyn is your
Right.
hosting service. So there's a very limited amount of customization that exists within that. But what we can do is within that page, if somebody did want to reach out to you about speaking or facilitating, what's the best way for someone to reach out to you about that?
What do you think is the best place for people to be able to reach out? Like, is it through LinkedIn?
Yeah, I think that because not everyone is on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
that it's good to check your LinkedIn profile to make sure that it explicitly says that this is something that you are available for and that you are offering. But then also, until the contact form is up and running, I think just having, oh, there is a built-in contact form on the Libsyn page. Where is that going, I wonder? But you could also just put your email address or a particular email address and say email here. On websites, typically, I don't recommend hyperlinking an email address because you will get bots if you don't have the right security
Yeah.
protocols and spam.
Uh-huh.
But if you just type out the email address and you don't hyperlink it, then that doesn't usually happen.
Okay.
So I will double check and see where your Libsyn contact page is going. And then maybe just add something in your description. And also in the show notes for your episodes, I think that we should make, sort of at the bottom where it has how to connect with you.
Hmm.
I think we should explicitly say, Lisa and Steve are facilitating however you want to describe what that service looks like.
Okay.
If this is something that you or your organization is interested in, please reach out here and just
Okay.
have that in every set of show notes.
Yes.
And I think that we would want to update because right now in your show, the intro and the outro are pre recorded and they're always
Mhm.
the same. And we recorded those at the beginning and they haven't been updated since.
Right.
But I think now that you have a little bit more of a focus, and your show can always change too. Like maybe you won't always be talking about healing racism and the empathy work on there. So maybe you'll shift again at some point, but right now that is the primary focus. So I think that we could update your intro and outro
Okay.
and have a specific call to action, or you could record a fresh outro every time or a fresh intro every time and put it in the thing. Let's talk about intros and outros and calls to action for a moment. So this can be a sticky point for some podcasters because for sake of ease and consistency, there is often a desire to have a pre-recorded fixed intro and outro for your show. So you record it one time, you put it with your intro music, everything fits nicely, and then you have an easy template for your show. Whether you are DIYing your own editing or whether you are hiring an editor, it's very simple and straightforward. However, this creates a problem because it takes away from the flexibility of your show and your ability to communicate things in a fresh, timely manner. So I am a huge fan of having some kind of flexibility built in so that if there is a specific thing that you want to share or invite people to be part of or promote, you can easily slide that into your intro or outro without disturbing the force. Also, if you want to make a tiny shift, if you suddenly want to start directing people to your new Instagram account, or if you have a particular landing page for an opt-in or a giveaway that you want to highlight, or maybe like I've been doing lately, you're doing a specific theme on your show and you really want to highlight that theme and make it a little bit different than just your normal standard show, whatever it is, template. When you record fresh every time, you have that baked in flexibility. Now, this isn't to say that if you do have a pre-recorded intro and or outro that you use standard every time that you can't make changes to it. So right now in this moment, this is me giving you permission to either record it fresh every time or make changes periodically as you go. One thing that I noticed is that the things that you're facilitating, so Lovely Space, tell us a little bit about what Lovely Space is right now.
So this is what I was going to say, and you can help me with this. I don't want to just be known for talking about racism and empathy or the
Right.
trauma of racism, but talking about empathy and trauma throughout conversations.
Okay.
And for now, that might certainly be much more of what I focus on because of the times. And so, with that being said, Lovely Space is a private Facebook group that just grew. The only intention was to have a group for a month of women that were just going to commit to, in fact, it's about a year old now, to commit to praying the month of August and just sending light and love to our family, to ourselves, to our hopes and our dreams. And people just kept adding people to the group. And when we got to last September, I asked if people wanted to continue, and everybody did. And so basically, it's really supporting the voice of women and also supporting the process of healing, whatever that might look like, and utilizing the space to find non-clinical ways to talk about the impact of trauma, resources, and empathy. There is called radical self-love, understanding that it has to begin with us before we can fully give that to anyone else.
And it's currently free to join.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, you've had at least one guest, possibly more than one guest, who has mentioned Lovely Space in
Right.
the context of their episode. And you've briefly said what it is, but it
Mhm.
hasn't been, it's this side thing that even I, as your editor who listens to your every word,
Mhm.
was even, I'm like, wait, is that a thing? And I, went on Facebook like,
Yeah.
oh, I wasn't 100% sure what it was. And I wonder if talking about redoing your intro and outro and having a very specific call to action. I think right now your show is framed as Lisa Lackey is a clinician in Chicago with this practice for addiction, et cetera. But I think that maybe how we identify who you are through your show is that you are a speaker and facilitator. This isn't exactly the language, but that Lisa Lackey is, I mean, obviously you're still a clinician, but that the focus is a speaker who facilitates messy conversations about healing trauma through empathy.
Mhm.
And conversations range from, facilitating women's groups like Lovely Space. You can join Lovely Space here. Lisa is available to facilitate whatever you call them, workshops, circles,
Mhm.
seminars, webinars,
Yeah.
whatever it is that you want to be facilitating around healing. And we can include the trauma of racism as like one of the things that you're able to facilitate because it is a very important topic that is of focus and interest right now.
Mhm.
But that it's clear that that's not the only thing that you're talking about and that the emphasis on trauma, healing, empathy.
Right. And I would say then listening to you, and this is just helping to clarify something for me, the expert that I'm putting out there is that I'm a conversation starter and
Mhm.
facilitator of messy conversations. And being able to use that experience as transformative as we look at the stuff that gets in the way of us having deeper conversations
Yeah.
like trauma and really identifying and even trying to find another word for trauma because a lot of people don't identify with that because they have another picture in mind and through a process of empathy.
Yeah, and I think that we can probably rescript your intro and outro for the show to make that even clearer.
Yeah.
and to have a very specific call to action that is to learn more about how Lisa can facilitate a messy conversation for,
Mhm.
for your organization or group. Go here, reach out here. And maybe that's just your email for now until the website is fully up. I feel like websites are never done and websites are always in flux, not just
Mhm.
yours,
Mhm.
everyone. My website is currently in a state of flux. People are asking me for services and they're like, "Oh, are your packages listed on your website?" And I'm like, "Absolutely not. They're not
Mhm.
there." It's not correct.
Mhm.
Updating the website is always the last priority, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want that to be a stumbling block that delays you putting the message and putting the offer out there,
Okay.
because it's something that people need to hear over time, repetition. And, your friend passed along your information in your podcast episode, which actually that explains also when I was looking at your download numbers. I believe that particular episode, Conversations with Some of My White Friends, has very good numbers. Like looking comparatively, that episode has done really well. Just a side note here, this is part of my job as a podcast producer and editor, is looking at the trends and patterns in my clients' stats and coming up with interpretations for why they look the way they do and what we can infer or learn from those patterns. So it's not so much that I am in their account monitoring their stats and noticing every little fluctuation and reporting back, this week you had this many downloads and this week because I actually don't even want my clients focusing on or fixating on that. I want them to be excited when there is something exciting to report, or curious when there is something abnormal that we might have an opportunity to figure out, like, why did that happen? Where did that come from? Sometimes it's mysterious. Sometimes we can't figure it out. But sometimes there are things that can be inferred, like if you are used to doing solo episodes and you suddenly have a guest and you notice, wow, we got a lot more downloads. Or if you notice certain guests were very popular, perhaps that was because of the content, perhaps that was because they shared it in a certain way, perhaps because their name has recognition and people were searching it, but perhaps that might be a guest that you would want to have on again in the future. Or if you notice your growth trends, like you are steadily growing, that's going to feel really, really good. If you notice that suddenly you're getting a lot more downloads in a particular country, that is not the country where you live in podcasts, or pretty much any country that's not the United States at this point, then that is something to look at and ask questions about why is that happening. So for those of you who are considering hiring an editor for the first time or switching editors, not all editors offer this kind of service or this kind of trend interpretation. But most producers and strategists will look at this sort of thing. So that is a good question to ask somebody that you are considering hiring, and something to keep in mind when you are looking at someone's pricing, why one editor may cost this and another editor may cost that.
Yeah, and the two women that I interviewed, they have a pretty large following.
Okay. And that was going to be the follow-up thing that I was going to ask.
Yeah.
And you and I talked about this in the beginning when you had said that you were going to start with solos, is that when you have guests, it gives you an opportunity to grow your show that you don't have when you're doing solos. And that is to leverage your guests and your
Mhm.
guests' audiences. And while it's a mistake to expect that your guests are going to promote your show
Right.
or to rely on that, you can do things to make it enticing and easy for them to do so.
And that will be lovely
Yes.
because for some of them, I've just flat out said, you know what? Can you just like put this on? But I would like a way of doing that. And I think most of the time it's just because people don't think about it,
Right.
you know?
Yep.
Not that they
Absolutely.
won't do it if they thought about it, and if there's an easy way to do it, and because we're human, if there is maybe some benefit for them.
Right. Now, we just talked about how guests on your show may affect your stats and downloads, but caveat, if I had a nickel for every time a podcaster thought that landing a big guest with a large following was going to break open their show, or complained about guests not sharing their episodes, well, you know the rest of that saying. Even I have forgotten to share episodes I've been featured on, and here are some of the reasons why that has happened. 1, sometimes it's because the host did not give me any assets or links to easily post. And I had to create my own post. And in some cases, they didn't even tell me when the episode was live. Like maybe I got an email that said, hey, your episode is coming up soon. Can I have a photo? Great. But then I never heard anything and I totally forgot all about it. And suddenly I'm looking at their show weeks and weeks later and I'm like, oh, wait, there's my episode. How come I didn't even know that was live? Maybe they did message me and it got lost in my inbox or spam filter or something. But I'm pretty sure there are some people who never told me my episode was live. 2, it could also be because they did post on social media. They did share the episode, but they didn't tag me. Tagging your guest in a social media post, especially if it's a platform you know they use, is the easiest way to prompt your guest politely and in a totally socially appropriate way to share their episode. Every guest that I have on the show, I send a follow-up email and it has the direct link to their episode. And I shorten it. So for your episodes, I always give you that short bit.ly link anyways, because it's easy to post a short link on social media than to have a big, long, cumbersome episode link. So I send an email, with gratitude. Here's the link to your show. And then if you would like to share on social media, please tag me so that I know and I can comment and I say I'm this on Instagram, this on LinkedIn, and this on Facebook, because I don't know what platforms they like to use.
Yeah.
So I want them to use whatever platform they like to use. If they tag me on Twitter, I'll never know because I never look at Twitter. I include 2 images for them that have their photo, the short link to the episode, and the name of the podcast. So one is their photo, one is a quote of something brilliant that I think they said. You know how people love putting quotes on Instagram. And then the third thing is one of those little audiograms. Have you seen those? Have we talked about those? So the audiogram, they're most popular on Instagram, but I do have one client that uses them pretty well on LinkedIn. It's the static image, but then it has an audio clip attached to it, a short audio clip from the episode, and a little animation that indicates that you should listen, that there's something to listen to. So it plays, you upload it as a video.
Okay.
And it has an excerpt, a clip from the audio.
So listen, here's where I'm getting ready to glaze over, Andrea.
Yep.
So that's not my full-time job.
I know.
And I have a whole bunch of them full-time. And those things I think have held me back a lot because I am not technologically savvy. And so I find myself figuring out how to do it, but it takes so much time.
Right. This is quite literally the plight of the indie podcaster, the intersection of everything you could be doing, your skill set, your time, your budget. In fact, though I love audiograms, I love the concept of them, I love seeing how other people are using them, I don't love making them. The app that I use is Headliner. I have tried using their automated version where every time you add a new episode to your feed, it will just pick a random piece of audio and make an audiogram for you so you don't have to do anything. But every time they always pick a weird section to clip and it doesn't really make sense to me and wouldn't be highlighting what I think is the best part of the episode. So yeah, that doesn't work for me. I also am not convinced that audiograms actually convert to new listeners to your show. However, they do provide a standalone piece of content when used well for your social media followers to consume that they will, at the very least, hover over longer than a static post. Whether or not they actually listen to it, chances are they're probably not, in which case that is an argument for taking the extra time to put the subtitled transcript on there and or to put a compelling text description in the actual post. And my final point about audiograms is that if you want to have some kind of video, moving, motion, graphic content on your social media feed, then they are still, though they can be a lot of work, they're still a lot less work than making actual video, in my opinion. You use Canva already, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what I have done is I create a template in Canva that will always look the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I can just swap the photo of the guest
Okay.
and then the URL of the episode or the episode number, but everything else stays the same.
And you do all that yourself?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Well, this is my full-time job, right? Doing this for myself and for other clients. So it is a service that I provide for some clients. So some clients have outsourced. So it's the balance between time, money, and the value of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When I was making graphics just to promote my own show in social media, I didn't always do it because it wasn't that useful. But what has been extremely useful is sending them to my guests, because then they don't have to create a thing. You're sending it to them. It looks really cool. It makes them look amazing that they were featured on this podcast. They can easily post it. And the other thing that works really well is if I post it on Instagram, then I can just tag them
Ah.
and they can just reshare it. They don't even have to post anything,
Oh.
even though I sent it to them. So if they forgot, if they weren't thinking about it, if they were like, where was that email from Lisa? It had a cool picture in it. They don't have to, because I already posted it for them and I tagged them, and all they have to do is reshare it. And I have had a few guests who love using Instagram stories that they'll make a whole story where they'll put my image and then they'll comment like, I was so honored to be a guest.
Mm.
And that's a really cool way. Like, a lot of people engage with that and see that way. And then on LinkedIn, also, it's very effective if your guests are active on LinkedIn to tag someone in a post on LinkedIn. And in fact, I don't think we have your Libsyn account. I don't think we have your Libsyn account configured to automatically post to any social media profiles when we release a new episode.
Right.
So that is also something that we could do that would not be an additional cost to you.
Okay.
Quick note here, if you are hosting with Libsyn, you may or may not already know this. If you are not hosting with Libsyn and you would like a promo code for your first month free, you can use promo code ENVY. Okay, here's my actual tip. Libsyn has a section in their dashboard called destinations, and some of those destinations are actual platforms for your podcast. Like Spotify is under destinations, Amazon Music is under destinations, but there are also social media destinations, which you may or may not be taking advantage of. So for example, you can automate a post to your business Facebook page, to your Twitter, to your LinkedIn profile, to SoundCloud if you use SoundCloud, to Tumblr if you use Tumblr. And if you're like, whoa, automation, oh, that sounds kind of crazy, you can, before you schedule it, customize the text that goes with that automated post. And you can also determine the specific date and time that that post comes out. It's a lot easier and a lot cheaper than paying for your own social media scheduling software or hiring someone to do it for you. And if you have a podcast manager like me who has a team that uploads your episodes into Libsyn for you, that is something that we can also provide. So I think for you, it's a combination of figuring out what can you add that isn't going to either take too much of your time or cost too much, or both. Like, where is
Mhm.
the sweet spot? So
Mhm.
maybe it's not 3 images in an audiogram. Maybe it's just one really great image that you're sharing, and that's better than not having anything to send them.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and maybe it's just starting there, and at some point you might upgrade it. Or if you have one really huge guest, a guest that has a huge following that you are like, this episode, I really want to do a solid job of promoting. I'd like to have an audiogram just for this episode.
Okay.
So not to overwhelm, but to have that as a possibility of something that you can create.
Okay. So options you're giving me.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good one. And
Yeah.
everybody likes to be tagged about what they're doing.
Exactly. Because we're human, we like to have that little, like, pat on the head, right?
That's right. Especially, like, during times like this, we'll take those pats however we can get them.
Yeah. So I feel like for you, the things that we talked about doing are updating your show description, updating your contact page and show notes to specifically say to speak, facilitate on the things that you've so eloquently said in this episode.
Okay.
Happy
Alright.
that there will be a recording and a transcript for that.
So the other thing was being able to have lips and automatically
Mhm.
link to my social media.
Yes. And I can send you the follow-up email that I send for every guest.
Okay.
It's a template, and I just change the link, the image, and I might customize a little message to them at the beginning and where to tag me. And by saying, if you post on social media, I would love for you to tag me without saying, hey, will you please post these in the following places? Just
Yeah.
by saying, if you post, please tag me here, you're gently nudging them to
Yeah.
share.
Yeah. I like that.
And then maybe further down the road, you get fancy with an audiogram here or there, but we'll leave that to the side as a possible because that is more time or budget.
Yeah.
So it's a nice to have. But I think if we start with some of these things, it'll help clarify the link between the podcast and the facilitating and speaking.
Okay. I'm really thankful that we have this time because
Yeah, this is great. I'm really thankful that you are willing to share your inquiries and exploration and learning with the listeners. And I think that also they will have learned a little bit about what you're doing with Inside Out Conversations and we'll check it out. And we'll be able to see your show grow.
I love it.
Podcast Envy is produced by your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. That's me. The Podcast Envy theme music is by Valentin Sosnitsky, courtesy of the Free Sound Project at freesound.org, and our podcast Angel music is by Benjamin Mastropolito, also on freesound.org as Lemon Cream. All music is licensed under the Creative Commons. Our episodes are mixed by Edwin Ruiz, and hey, if you want your show to sound as good as ours, hire us. Put the magic audio mojo of the Creative Imposter Studios to work for you. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to making your podcast the envy of everyone else.